Hi there, I'm Christian Hanley, and welcome to Checkmate. This week has been absolutely insane in terms of the news cycle, and while most shows will be talking about Trump and his ridiculous racist rant that he called an Oval Office address, today we're taking a deeper dive at some of the issues that have been overlooked in today's news. The first we'll be looking at is the issue of Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign manager who was recently implicated in a direct act of treason against the United States. In case you missed it, Manafort's lawyers were so incompetent that they forgot to redact an important and incriminating piece of information in a recent court filing that directly showed to the public that Paul Manafort, as Trump's campaign manager, shared confidential, private campaign data, polling, with the Russians. Not just the Russians, but with a Russian who is known to have direct ties to Russian intelligence. Let's put that in perspective, right? A lot of folks would be saying, especially on the Trump side, that sharing some numbers or looking at spreadsheets or looking at maps might have just been showing off, that it's not that big of a deal. But here's why that's bogus. Campaign data or market data, any data that allows political or marketing campaigns to find detailed information on people so that they can target them with their advertisements, that is proprietary. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, depending on the size of the campaign you're running. There is no way this was giveaway information. This sort of data is so important to a campaign that it literally cannot run without it. And it is how a campaign reaches voters. On the one hand, just like in marketing, you have the creative, you have the videos, you have the speeches, you have all of that. But you're never going to get that to the people who need to hear or see it unless you have this data. Companies spend their entire days, their entire workforces virtually, on compiling this data from past voting records, from consumer reports, and from all sorts of other information. And the way in which they overlay that, slice it and dice it and compile it, is itself proprietary. It is their trade secret. When campaigns, political campaigns, purchase that data, they pay out the nose for it. It is how they live and die. And so for Trump's campaign manager, at any point, to share that with someone on the outside is unthinkable. And the fact that he shared it with a Russian who had ties to the GRU, that's even more unthinkable. At this point, don't forget, back in the campaign, back in 2016, the United States government, our intelligence agencies, we knew that the Russians were trying to hack this election. I mean, this gets forgotten because there have been so many crazy things that have happened since then. Comey was fired. Mueller was appointed. But don't forget, we knew all about this back during 2016. President Obama made the decision to not intervene because he was afraid he would delegitimize the outcome of the election, or at the very least be accused of partisanship. But Hillary Clinton brought up this interference during one of the debates. And in fact, U.S. intelligence agencies were already investigating infiltrations by Russian hackers. So this was a known factor. This is a known factor, and we had WikiLeaks dropping information, dropping stolen data gained with the help of Russian intelligence to help sway our elections. So this was a known factor. This was a known item at the time. And now we know for a fact that aside from coordination via tweet, aside from WikiLeaks and the timing of their attacks and their leaks, aside from all of that, we know now that Trump's campaign manager was connected with Russia directly and was sharing proprietary campaign data with the Russians. Now, aside from this making Paul Manafort a certifiable traitor to the United States, it shows us that the Trump campaign was in fact a co-conspirator with Russian intelligence intervening in the 2016 election. Let's say that again. Aside from showing us that Paul Manafort is a certified traitor to the United States, this revelation makes clear that the Trump campaign, its campaign manager, was co-conspiring with Russian intelligence to sway the 2016 election. We now have proof of this. It's not just a theory. One of the reasons this is so galling, aside from the sheer lunacy, the sheer treachery of this, is the fact that the Trump campaign was only successful in the Electoral College. He lost the popular vote, and he only got the Electoral College vote by a couple of thousand votes spread across a few key states. But the thing is, We didn't know those would be key states at the time. We did not know that Pennsylvania would be in play. Typically, in the Northeast and Northern Midwest, Democrats always had what we called a blue wall. That was the conventional wisdom, that those states did not need to be campaigned in by Democratic candidates so much because they were already in the bag. And it was up to Republicans, who appealed to a much smaller and whiter electorate, who had to put in the work in other states to make up for the sheer population density of those so-called blue states. So, backing up for a bit, if we didn't know that these states were key states, if we didn't know that they were in play, then how did the Trump campaign? How did the Russian trolls, how did the Russian advertisers, how did they know this leading up to the 2016 election? I mean, look, there's no surprise here. America has its social and racial and political issues. We already had these fault lines in our democracy, and it will take generations to heal them. Russia knew that. Russia can turn on any American TV channel or watch any American movie and see some of these things. That's not a difficult thing to find. It does not take a spy to find out America's innermost problems. But what it does take to target those problems, to stoke those resentments, those angers in certain populations at certain times and at very specific points on an election map, that doesn't just take Russian intelligence. That takes the assistance of an American political consultant who had access to current polling and who had a strategy in mind to exploit what he was analyzing. We now know that the agent who made that map possible, the traitor who betrayed his country and gave over Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin to Donald Trump, and thus America to an invalid and frankly illegitimate president, that man, that consultant, was Paul Manafort. We know Russia interfered in our election and gave us President Trump, and we now finally have the missing link. The link that shows us which American on the inside worked to help Russia. But as former CIA Director John Brennan once said, Russia could not exploit any fissures, any cracks in our democracy that we did not already have. That brings us to what's going on right now in North Carolina. North Carolina has been infamous for several years now as a laboratory of super PAC money and outside influence upending democracy on a state level. But what's happened this past election in 2018 is a whole different level. Republican Mark Harris, without any regard for the will of the people and without any respect for democratic norms, used a political consultant who was known by even other Republicans to be untrustworthy and, in fact, possibly dangerous. This consultant, a man by the name of Dowless, allegedly started a campaign within a campaign to take absentee ballots from voters, especially black voters, especially elderly voters, especially rural voters, and either never turn in their ballots or mark them for them. That is to say, mismark them allegedly on behalf of the voters and casting fraudulent ballots. Now, if anyone remotely ethical had a subordinate do something this criminal, this unforgivable on their watch, the appropriate response would be to step down, apologize, and have that person take responsibility for their actions. But not for Mark Harris and not for the state GOP. They are right now pushing to have Harris seated in the United States House of Representatives, despite the fact that his election was never certified because of the ongoing investigation in North Carolina. And not only that, but the state GOP is now pushing for a lawsuit to force his seating in Congress. Now, I don't know the details of the lawsuit, and I have no idea why they filed this suit at the state level down in North Carolina. But what came out this past week is the fact that now that Democrats are finally in charge of the House, they may in turn start their own House investigation of this election. And once that happens, there's no doubt that this will not end well for Mark Harris or for his campaign staff. This is an unforgivable act that literally stole votes from the hands of voters, for some of whom that vote was really their only power in our democracy. The case of Harris's power grab or attempted power grab in North Carolina, unfortunately, is not an isolated one, and it actually does connect directly to the previous story about Russian meddling and Manafort. You see, our crisis of democracy did not begin with Russia. Putin saw an ongoing crisis slowly unfolding and decided to jump in and speed it up. In North Carolina, Harris is blatantly trying to steal a seat that he did not win, or at least that we don't know if he actually won. And Harris is not alone. Republicans across the country have changed from a party of ideologues to a party of pure power-seeking pragmatists. Country does not matter. People do not matter. Institutions do not matter. All that matters is gaining and maintaining power. We see it in Wisconsin, with outgoing Governor Scott Walker trying to strip the incoming Democratic governor of any power. But let's stay with North Carolina for a second, because what's going on with Harris goes back even farther. North Carolina famously became a hotbed for super PAC money after the Citizens United decision, where even state legislators running for their own small local districts found themselves on the defensive, being attacked by huge amounts of outside money, trying to put in their place representatives who would put forward the interests of corporate donors, not the people of their district. And right now, North Carolina is still in the news, not just for the Harris case, but for an ongoing gerrymandering case. In Rucho versus Common Cause, a group is suing to change the North Carolina congressional district map drawn by Republicans on the basis that it is an unconstitutional gerrymander. Gerrymandering's been in the news, so as everyone knows, gerrymandering is the act of carving up districts to give an advantage to an incumbent or a certain political party. Typically, and historically, courts have not intervened much in gerrymandering cases. The reason being, they treat them as political matters, not as legal ones. The exceptions, of course, are when a district is drawn to benefit a certain race over another. At that point, it's no longer considered political, but a civil rights issue. But here's where it gets murky. There's no denying that in today's America, we have one political party that is the party of white people. The Republican Party has no diversity. And as the recent swearing in of the new Congress shows us, it stands in stark contrast to today's Democratic Party. While Democrats looked like America, Republicans looked much like a 1950s suburban golf club. Every single new member was a white man. And it's not just an issue in Congress. Republicans nationwide are by and large white. And when it comes to their elected officials, it's even worse. Today, there are virtually no Republicans in office at any level of government in any state who are not white. So why does this matter in a gerrymandering case? Well, because courts used to stay out of political issues. They wouldn't step in and intervene and decide cases brought over partisan gerrymandering because they were purely political and not legal matters. The exception, of course, was when the gerrymander was alleged to be a racial gerrymander. But what happens when a party exists, when a party's identity is, though unspoken, racial? That is the Republican Party today. And so it's impossible to separate the issue of race and gerrymandering and political affiliation in 2019. If Republicans are gerrymandering districts to benefit Republicans, it also means Republicans are gerrymandering districts to help white people over everyone else. The stakes here are incredibly high. Gerrymandering is a national issue. It is why it takes so many more votes nationwide in any given election for Democrats to win the House of Representatives. Because in literally dozens of states since the 2010 census, Republicans have used computer technology and new analytics to carve us up so finely that they can dilute the votes of Democrats across the country. And when they dilute the votes of Democrats, they not only are abusing and disrespecting our democratic norms, but they are also engaged in an act of racial gerrymandering at every time. The fact is, it's time for gerrymandering to end. There's no need for it. And in a time when we have computer technology that can finally gerrymander a district and give litigants in court, Republicans, enough plausible deniability to defend themselves against accusations of racial gerrymandering, then that also means that we have the technology to get rid of gerrymandering and make districts competitive across this country. Now, some may wonder, why would any Republican be against this idea? In fact, why would they want to have gerrymandering at all if they can win the fight on their own? Well, the problem is they can't win the fight on their own. Republicans represent an increasingly shrinking slice of the population. And aside from throwing red meat to particularly angry white men in exchange for votes, they truly only defend the interests of a select few individuals and corporations. In fact, for the most part, they represent extractive industries, coal, oil and natural gas. They know that they are the party of the past, and that's why they are fighting so hard to make adjustments to our very electoral systems in order to maintain power long after they are relevant. Now, we've talked about North Carolina with regards to the Harris campaign and the investigation into his possible stealing of an election. And we've talked about the issue of gerrymandering in North Carolina. But I want to stick with gerrymandering for just one last minute here. Because while we have one gerrymandering case being brought in North Carolina against Republicans, there's another one happening right now in Maryland against Democrats. Now, Republicans in Maryland argue that their First Amendment rights have been harmed, have been infringed upon by Democrats who have carved up a congressional district in the current map that lumps in Democrats from the I-270 corridor northwest of Washington, D.C., along with rural white Western Maryland voters. We could do an entire show discussing the merits of this case and talking about why Maryland's districts look the way they do and how they are designed in part to favor racial diversity in the congressional delegation, all of those sort of things. But that's not the point of this right now. The point is, there are two states in this country that arguably are gerrymandered in favor of Democrats. And I say arguably because we don't have time to break all that down right now. But those two states are Maryland and Illinois. We live in a country where like cases are treated alike, where once a federal appeals court or even the Supreme Court makes a decision, all the courts beneath them need to follow that decision in deciding future cases that are similar. So here's why the Maryland case matters more to Republicans than they can even appreciate. Should the court rule in favor of Maryland's Democratic Attorney General Brian Frosh, then that's all fine and good. A Democratic AG wins the day, and the districts stay in place. Nothing changes. But on the other hand, if the court rules in favor of the Republicans, they have set themselves a new precedent. They now have a court case that can be looked to by courts across this country when deciding future cases that are brought against Republicans for the exact same alleged offense of partisan gerrymandering. But the difference is, while only two states can even be alleged to be gerrymandered in favor of Democrats, there are literally dozens across the country that are most definitely gerrymandered to favor Republicans. Congratulations, Maryland GOP. You played yourselves. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching. And look, I know some of the things we talked about today are intense, right? We're talking about Russian infiltration in our democracy. We're talking about a traitor or at least a co-conspirator right now in the White House. We're talking about Republicans being so obsessed with power that they're willing to steal votes, that they're willing to all but rig elections, redraw maps in their favor, and even accept help from a foreign adversary so long as it means winning. This is dark stuff. But we also live in America, and we're Democrats. And if you care about our democracy and the health of our democracy and the future, we can still have a bright one. It is not too late. But it's not going to be easy. And democracy is not a spectator sport. It really does start with us. There are structural changes that need to be made. Citizens United does need to be reversed, and election security needs to be bolstered, and reforms need to happen. But those are not going to happen unless we push for them, unless we agitate at the local and state level and work our way up. So whether it's getting involved in a local campaign or even running for office yourself, whatever it is, Whatever you feel comfortable doing, get out there and do it. Because your community needs you and your country needs you. So let's get out there together and make a difference. Thanks so much for watching. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like and share on Facebook, and don't forget to like our Facebook page, Christian Hanley Official, and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks so much.